Hey guys, Hink here. So peptides are all the rage, and if you want me to make a video reviewing my favorite peptides for PE, just leave a comment in the comment section saying, hey Hink, make a video about peptides. But today we're going to be talking about one in particular. It's called PT-141, also known as Bremelanotide, or at least that's how I say it, okay? And so it has some really major implications as far as penile health, erectile function, nitric oxide pathway, and even sexual dysfunction. So there's a lot of potential for use for PE and even for use for injury recovery and just in general maximizing your encounters. And so we're going to get into it today. So stay tuned. So in general, you need some background. So the melanocortigenic system, it's responsible for many different things. Part of it actually, like melanin, yeah, it could be responsible for things like skin health, skin pigmentation, but it also is responsible for the actual neurotransmitter pathway when it comes to sexual function and sexual wellness. And there's been a lot of research over the years on this. I'm going to call it the MC system so I don't have to say melanocortinergic system every single time. But the MC system is very responsible for the erection pathway that's been studied over the years. And one of the reasons why they started studying this is there's actually a peptide. You can get it either in injectable form or a nasal spray. It's called melanotan, but it basically is a way of essentially stimulating your melanocytes, and it causes literally not a fake tan, but a tan. So I'm going to have Callie put up some melanotan videos, but it's literally, you can get like dark, like significantly darker than me, which, isn't saying much by using this. But what they found was that people that were using this artificial tanning peptide were having improvements in sexual function and erectile function. So they started studying this pathway. And there's two important things that kind of distinguish this away from other things like Viagra, for example. So number one, it's actually responsible in not only like the psychologic, but the neurotransmitter pathway and the way like sexual information is processed and how that regulates sexual function. It's responsible for that. But it is also responsible for the actual neurotransmitter. So many of you guys don't realize that actual erections occur because of nitric oxide, but the nitric oxide is released from the actual, basically the nerve endings like in the actual penis, or what releases the actual like nitric oxide. And so nitric oxide is what's responsible for erections. But if you guys are really interested about like all of the background about how erections, spontaneous erections, nocturnal erections, whatever it may be occur, this paper here is amazing for that. And so what they were able to do is isolate that peptide, the PT-141, and they started using it on rat studies. And what they found is that when they injected these rats with this PT-141, there was a dramatic and significant improvement in spontaneous erectile function and even sexual activity in these rats. And 100% of the rats that were injected with this peptide had at least one erection in this process. So they found that it was very potent as well. So next what they did is they said, okay, proof of concept, let's do it in some small studies in humans. And so they started using it in men that had a poor response to Viagra, so Viagra non-responsive men. And what they found was that when they used this PT-141, this was via injection, they noted statistically significant improvements in erectile quality and erectile function in all the men that were injected with this when compared to a placebo. So next they did this, what we call a double-blind placebo-control study, meaning that both the participants and the observers didn't know who was getting which, but only like the people kind of regulating the study behind the scene knew. So it's like the highest level of evidence that you can have. And this was in men with mild to moderate erectile dysfunction. And what they found was that there was a dramatic improvement in erectile function, and it was in a dose-dependent manner. When you had basically like 7 milligrams or more, you had significantly better improved erectile function compared to like 2 milligrams, where you still had an improvement, but it wasn't nearly as much. And they used this thing called a Rigiscan to basically determine how strong the erection was. And they noticed that there was a 3-fold increase with the erectile activity. Now this was using 20 milligrams of the intranasal peptide spray. And they overall found that this was very safe and very effective as well. So there wasn't any significant negative side effects that were observed. And so things like drops in blood pressure didn't occur. Headaches, flushing didn't occur on this particular study. So next they wanted to see if this was actually synergistic with Viagra. And so what they did was they used 25 milligrams of Viagra, which is actually a very low dose of Viagra compared to like a typical prescription dose, which is usually somewhere between 50 to 100 milligrams of Viagra or sildenafil. And they combined this with 7.5 milligrams of the PT-141. And what they found was that there was a dramatic improvement in erection function, especially when you combine the two, but even just with the PT-141 alone. And so it's basically synergistic together with Viagra to give you an even better erection response. The last kind of major human research study that they looked at was actually home administration of PT-141 to see if this really needed to be dosed in the clinic or it could be done safely at home. And what they found was, once again, guys, a dramatic improvement in erectile function, even when administered in home. And once again, they did look at different doses, and there was once again a dose-dependent improvement in actual erection function. So the higher the dose, the higher the response, within limits, guys. But I did think this was interesting. And, I say this all the time, but here they actually used a placebo. In the placebo group, still, they had 17% of the guys that reported an improvement in erection quality. And so what I always say is, in general, placebo effect is up to 20%, okay? And so that's what kind of bothers me about, like, everybody thinks the latest, greatest thing, once again, whether it be heat or whether it be vibrations or whether it be the P shot. There's all of these things, and literally just placebo alone, just injecting saline, can cause up to 20% of a response, or 20% of people thinking that they are getting some additional improvement from it. So guys, just be real careful and just try to analyze things critically. And in this group of home administration, there was one participant that had a prolonged erection, but it wasn't technically like ischemic priapism, and it did go away on its own without intervention. So just a prolonged erection, some guys, they might think that's a good thing. So that basically covers the data. All right, guys, I think this is pretty interesting because there's a lot of libido mismatch, especially when it comes to like male and female partners. And one of the studies that actually, and I believe this is one of the few FDA approved indications for this P141, is actually in sexual dysfunction in women. And that's what this study looked at. And so this study showed that there was improvement in desire, arousal, and big O scores when administered before intercourse when compared to a placebo. So, there's unequivocally, it is effective in women that have basically a sexual arousal disorder, okay, or sexual dysfunction. I did think it was very interesting that the mechanism of action is a little bit different, because when you're looking at in men, it's actually more so through, yes, it is through the sexual stimulus psychogenic pathway, but it's more so through the ability of the PT-141 to improve the nitric oxide release through the nerve endings in the penis as well. But in women, they say the mechanism of action is a little bit different, because it's actually stimulating the areas of the brain that are aroused in motivational, arousal, and appetitive aspects of sexual behavior. So it works on basically a mental pathway, but it also is going to release more nitric oxide and things like the clitoral organs and the genital organs to help relieve that sexual dysfunction. So guys, how is this administered? Well, if you were paying attention to these studies, there's really two main ways it's administered. One is either through subcutaneous injection, meaning you take a needle, you kind of like pinch some fat, and you inject the needle right into the fat and deliver it where you have typically a higher concentration of adipose cells for better absorption. Common with a lot of peptides, guys. Like, I don't know if you know this, but insulin is a peptide, okay? But typically peptides are injected sub-Q because peptides are very unstable. And so if you try to swallow an oral formula, your gastric acid actually breaks it down and makes it inusable. There's some arguable evidence for things like BP-157. If you get BP-157, I believe it's the acetate, it's a more stable and it doesn't break down as much, but that's still kind of questionable evidence. And the other thing with peptides is a lot of times people will try to sell you a nasal spray, but guys, if these peptides are fragile and it's being transported in this liquid and it's shaken up all over the place, it's a high chance you're going to get some bunk stuff that isn't going to work, okay? So just be careful when you're evaluating these peptides. And so once again, the other formula is the nasal spray. And so there is a nasal spray that does have published literature that it can be effective as well for this specific peptide. All right, guys, so it is important to talk about dosing, okay? So when you're talking about women and when you're talking about sub-Q injection, it's 1.75 milligrams injected about 30 to 45 minutes prior to any kind of desired activity. You have to limit it to one dose per 24 hours, and all of the information I can find says you want to limit it to less than 8 doses in a month, okay? So that's not really that much. That's maybe 2 doses a week, okay? At least for me, that twice a week is not enough. Whereas for men, you can actually go a bit higher and you can go up to 2 milligrams. And what they say is that if you're going to try this, you want to start with 1 milligram and then gradually titrate your way up to 2 milligrams as you can tolerate it, but the same rules apply. 1 dose per 24 hours and essentially less than 8 doses per week. Now, how about cost and availability? Well, guys, if you're in the United States, it's actually legal to get research peptides, okay? So regardless of where you are, just don't break any laws, okay? And if things say not for human consumption, they're not for human consumption. Depending on the size of the injection, it's anywhere between $25 to $50 per dose. And so like a vial of PT-141 is going to be anywhere between $150 to $300. It is pretty expensive. It's not quite expensive as some of the other things, but it can be cost prohibitive if you're talking about $25 to $50 per dose. If you go through GoodRx and you get something like sildenafil, Viagra, I mean, then you can get it for, closer to like 50 cents per dose of that medication. So we'll talk about separate things, so don't get confused here. What are the side effects? Typical side effects are going to be headaches, flushing, nausea, sometimes some mild GI disturbance are kind of the more typical things. Less commonly, things you can get are dizziness, blurred vision, joint pain. But guys, now this is an important one. There is evidence, because this is working along that MC pathway in the brain. If you were to take this too often, you could potentially desensitize that pathway, which could lead to long-term sexual dysfunction. So you need to be aware of that. Hence why they say less than 8 doses per month. Now, there is published literature saying that you can, in fact, take this long-term and it is safe, but it's safe within those constraints, okay? It's not safe to take this every day. Now, where does this come in for PE application for all my guys that are trying to get bigger out there? Well, I mean, I think it's quite obvious in the sense that the better your erection quality, the larger your size is going to be. If you just want to maximize your size, you want to max out your EQ, duh. Anybody that's doing any kind of girth work, pumping, clamping, the better your erection quality, the better your session's going to be. I think the better your growth is going to be, duh. Nocturnal erections are a key to overall penile health. If you haven't seen my video on importance of nocturnal erections, please check that out. But, potentially doing a dose of this, twice a week before bed to help maximize your nocturnal erections could be a potential indication for recovery. If for some reason the cost of Viagra is way more expensive than the cost of this, this might be a helpful surrogate. Hopefully you guys have seen the countless videos I've made about the importance of PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra, Cialis. If you are aware those can't get Viagra and you can get this, maybe you could try that out. Now, what are some of the major drawbacks? Well, guys, I'll tell you right now, I was interested in this peptide. I'm not going to take it now. And I think the major drawback for me is that, number one, this isn't like a daily thing. This is like a special occasion type of thing. Once again, less than 8 doses per month. It's expensive. And then the fact that I could potentially screw up that MC pathway, that's, for me, you guys know I'm risk averse. That's not something that I would be willing to do long term just to get a slightly better erection quality when I don't have any erection issues right now. Now, when it comes to actual injury recovery, that's where I think this has much more implication. And so let's say that you have hard flaccid and you're trying to recover from that and you have erectile dysfunction from it and it's not responding to Viagra. You could potentially throw this on there to see if it's going to help stimulate some of those nerves to release more nitric oxide and to help you recover faster and get some of your erection quality back. And so guys, I have an entire hard flaccid course. Link is in the description if you're interested. Hopefully you're not suffering from that. A lot of time when guys get issues, they go to see their doctor and their doctor tells them, oh, dude, that's all in your head. Well, this will absolutely help with psychogenic ED. If you take this and it actually resolves your erection issues, then there's actually a pretty reasonable chance that it is a psychogenic process and not a plumbing process. That being said, once again, there is that nitric oxide pathway that is involved. It's not a foolproof thing, but for some guys, that's all they would need to know is take PT-141 and they get a great erection. They're like, okay, my stuff does work. And it's like, oh, all right, I do have a working Jimmy. And then they can kind of relax and that can start this pathway of healing. And I also think that there might be some potential implications for the corn-induced erectile dysfunction. I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments, actually, Hink, that's not a real thing. There's no data that shows the dopamine pathways are affected. It is what it is, guys. If you are a corn addict and you want to keep doing your thing, more power to you, brother. I got nothing but love for you. But for those that are suffering from that and do have some corn-induced erectile dysfunction, this could potentially help with developing healthier pathways as far as that arousal stimulus. So in summary, guys, before I get there, if you're interested in my enlargement course, I've been able to gain over 1.5 inches over the span of the last 3 years through doing things that, I teach you in this course, which are based on real science, real published data. And quite honestly, there's nobody else doing it like me, guys. Maybe that sounds cocky, but it is what it is. And so if you want to learn from me, courses in the description. But guys, I think this PT-141, I think it's very interesting. In my opinion, it has the most potential implications when it comes to injury recovery and kind of reversing erectile dysfunction. I don't think the role in PE is that promising, and I personally wouldn't recommend it. If you want to try it out and report back to me, more power to you. Once again, just don't break any laws. It does work synergistically with PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra, and it has clear published data to help people get over certain types of sexual dysfunction, both men and women. So promising peptide, a lot of data behind it, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. Guys, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, especially, please take a second to like the video. Please subscribe. I'm trying to grow on my way to 30K, guys. I love you guys. Remember, there's nothing wrong with self-improvement, but you are enough just as you are. All right, guys, catch you on the next one. Peace and love.
Dr. Hink got the plug on the health, yeah. Got you thinking about your wealth, yeah. In his office, no stealth, yeah. Pinnacle of that below the belt, yeah. Checks and balance, he's managing. Working miracles, no damage. Got you covered, no panic.